Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. Now, this week, we're looking at a spat in Washington between New York State Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and President Trump. Now, this unfolded with a tweet while Gillibrand and other Senate Democrats were calling for an investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct against President Trump. Gillibrand said the president should resign because of the allegations, and if he wouldn't, he should face an investigation. Now, President Trump responded in a tweet calling Gillibrand a lightweight and a flunky for Senator Schumer, saying that Gillibrand would come into his office begging for campaign contributions and she would do anything to get them. Well, that was perceived as sexist and even sexual innuendo and far beneath the dignity of a president.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice, and I will not be silenced on this issue.
He's used that same terminology many times in reference to men. There's no way that this is sexist at all. I think only if your mind is in the gutter would you have read it that way.
Now, when asked about her prior interactions with the president when she was running for office, Senator Gillibrand told reporters that President Trump was just a supporter of my first campaign. Senator Schumer was also quick to defend his Empire State colleague.
That tweet was nasty, unbecoming of a president. Senator Gillibrand's an outstanding member of the Senate. The president needs to cut it out with the tweeting. He ought to stop tweeting and start leading.
Now, the letter sent to the House Oversight Committee seeking an investigation into the allegations against President Trump had more than 100 lawmakers' signatures on it. However, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, South Carolina Republican Trey Gowdy, has not responded to the letter. We are heading into a midterm election year now with Senator Gillibrand up for re-election. And I'm joined now by Diane Donato from WGY Radio. Thank you, Diane, for being here today. And Siena College Research Institute pollster Steve Greenberg. Steve, thank you for joining us well today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Now, with this issue right in the forefront, Steve, based on all of your polling and experience, does this give women the opportunity, both in 2018 and then again, of course, which is what everybody's thinking about, right? 2020 in a run again for president.
Well, there's no question that we have seen across the country since President Trump's election a little more than a year ago, more involvement by women in the political process. A group like Emily's List, which focuses purely on women candidates, has seen a huge uptick in the number of women who are coming forward and saying they want to get involved in the political process, and not just get involved, but be candidates. So I think we're going to see a lot more women running for, big offices like Senate and Congress, but also lesser offices like state legislature, local government officials. I think we're going to see a lot more of that over the coming years, and that's good.
And both of the parties want to get the pool to be bigger, because anything that can help them right now, because things are so tight, any added benefit of a movement to advance women in politics is something that they're going to want to get behind. Right now in the House and the Senate, both of them, about 20% are women, which is really pretty small when you think about it. It's 2017, so there are about 84 women in the House, and we have 21 women who are senators right now. So that's about 100 people. That's a pool of about 100. That's pretty small.
What do you think about Gillibrand? What does this do for her stature and the possibility that she might consider a run in 2020?
Well, first, as you said in your opening, Senator Gillibrand is up for re-election, 11 months from now in November 2018. This will be her third statewide race, having won first after she was appointed by then Governor Patterson to her seat. Right. She won the two-year term to fill out the remainder of that term in 2010, and then won a full six-year term in 2012. She won both of those races handily, and where we stand right now, 11 months out, New York voters like her. She has a better than 2-to-1 favorability rating. What makes her different than other Democrats, though, who run statewide, she's from upstate. She's one of the few, right now she's the only statewide official who comes from upstate.
Who also has a lot of downstate support.
Absolutely. Right. So she does well in the Democratic base of New York City and some of the downstate Democratic suburbs, but she also does much better than most Democrats upstate because she is an upstater. So very popular with New York voters right now. And 11 months out, voters tell Siena that they are strongly prepared to re-elect her. And at the moment, we still don't even know who her opponent will be.
So she's Also, she's not a lightweight by any means, so she's made no major political missteps in her time in office so far. That's one thing. People are willing to re-elect her. She doesn't have a lot of baggage to her. She's well educated. She has been at the forefront of the sexual misconduct in the military, so she's not new to this issue. And yes, she's well liked in New York, but she just had her platform raised significantly this week with President Trump. This has changed a lot for her, put her on a national platform. She, for her Twitter, her response to President Trump saying she will not be silenced has been retweeted 154,000 times and has been liked 438,000 times.
Yeah, those are almost Trump-like numbers in terms
Those really
of Twitter.
are.
No question. I would say a year or so ago, Kirsten Gillibrand was not particularly well known nationally. I don't think she's still a national figure in the way that, say, a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren are, but she's getting there.
She's on her way.
She's
on
her way.
She seems to be exposing herself to more national publicity.
Absolutely. And look, you know, as you said, Diane, she's been involved in sexual harassment in the military for several years now. Mm-hmm. But a few weeks ago, she came out and said that if what President Clinton did, if we were living in today's world, he would have been forced to resign. Then she was the lead senator, the first woman Democratic senator to come out calling on Senator Franken to resign, and then a lot of other women and a lot of other Democrats followed her. So she's really taken on a leadership role on this, and then the fight with President Trump, I mean, that can only help her with Democratic voters and Democratic funders.
And
all right, how about
young.
this? Last topic, how about this? There's also an 800-pound elephant in the room. Let's say Gillibrand wins for Senate, which she likely will, and then we have Governor Cuomo, who's running for re-election. He will likely win. And then that could potentially put both of them vying for a presidential Democratic nomination for 2020. How will that play out?
Well, look, we are a long ways away from that. There's 3 years till the next presidential election, and those are not the only two Democratic names. I mean, I mentioned Sanders and Warren, and there's a host of others. I mean, remember when Trump ran for the Republican nomination 2 years ago, there were 16 Republicans, including former Governor Pataki in it. So I think you're going to see a lot of Democrats, but there's no question that Senator Gillibrand helped her national reputation, particularly with Democrats over the course of the last few weeks.
And for both of them, for Cuomo and Gillibrand, they may not enjoy that scenario, but for the Democrats, boy, there are worse problems to have than to have two people who are great candidates from New York.
And think about this. New York hadn't been in presidential politics since FDR.
Yes. Yeah.
And then last year we had two New Yorkers running against each other, Trump and Clinton. And now we have two prominent New Yorkers, Governor Cuomo, Senator Gillibrand, who are being talked about as potential Democratic presidential candidates. That's great for New York.
It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, thank you both very much for joining us. Steve Greenberg from Siena Polling, and also Diane as well. Now, Governor Cuomo's State of the State address is coming up on January 3rd, and the first proposal he released is targeting domestic violence. Coming up, we discuss his plans to take guns away from people convicted of abuse. Plus, New York's Attorney General taking on the FCC, how he's hoping to save net neutrality. That's still ahead. And of course, if you have a comment or a story idea, let us know about it. You can email us here on Empire State Weekly, or you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. Governor Cuomo is taking aim at domestic abuse, unveiling a new proposal that would take guns away from people convicted of both violent and nonviolent domestic abuse crimes. He cites a link between domestic violence and gun-related deaths. Now, the measure would be immediate, and it would include even misdemeanor offenses. It would also apply to certain court protection orders before conviction. Now, this is the governor's first proposal of the 2018 State of the State address, which takes place on January 3rd. While it's only a proposal right now, the measure is already getting support and some criticism as well. Joining me now is Gwen Wright, the Executive Director of the State Office for Prevention of Domestic Violence. And also Lisa Frisch, the Executive Director for the Legal Project. Now, you are both advocates for this bill. First of all, thank you for joining us here on Empire State Weekly. What was your initial reaction when you heard this from the governor? Let's start with you, Gwen.
Well, I was pleasantly surprised. It's something we've been discussing for quite a while. There are already provisions for removal of guns, but there have been gaps. So this is a mechanism to close some of those gaps.
Lisa, when you heard about this, what was your thought?
I was very happy. This is something that we've been pushing for a long time in the state, and it's long overdue, so we're very happy.
Now, the governor pointed out that domestic violence in many cases leads to gun violence, and especially when there are guns in the home. Mm-hmm. So this will go a long way toward hopefully avoiding that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the things that we do know about domestic violence is that when there are guns in the home, fatalities are much more likely to occur. And so this is a protective matter for not just the victims of domestic violence, but other family members and for our communities at large.
What are some of the stories you hear about domestic violence issues as you're fighting to keep women safe in many cases, but yet there are still guns in the picture?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly that increases the risk. Because not only does it increase the risk of homicide, but it also increases the risk of physical harm and the nature of the threats. So many victims of domestic violence feel like they can't leave, they're not able to escape because of that threat of gun violence. We do know that statistically in this country, 50 women in America are killed by firearms by their abusers a month. So that it's not an idle threat that these victims are hearing from their abusers. So it's really important that we do everything we can to shore up the protections. We know that it's very difficult to protect everyone in domestic violence cases, and this is one way that we can actually make a difference.
Now, opponents of this might say this is the governor taking just another step toward removing guns in all cases. New York has one of the most restrictive gun laws in the nation. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that what we have to look at is who is being most harmed. And in this instance, when we look at domestic violence, as Lisa said, the number of homicides that are a direct result of having guns by domestic abusers is significant. And so I think that, as you said, we do have some of the most restrictive gun laws that there are, but for families, it's a particularly heightened danger when there are guns in the homes. Mm-hmm. And we know that more often than not, when there is a domestic homicide, it's a domestic homicide-suicide. So we think about the children in those households who are left without parents. So it's a win-win. So in terms of the opposition, it's hard to wrap your brain around thinking about why not in this instance. Yeah. And we know these are the perpetrators of domestic abuse are serial perpetrators. They do it again and again and again and again, and often to a fatal end.
This has to get through the legislature, and opponents might say, where does it stop? For example, you take away guns, do you take away next the baseball bat or the golf club that could also be used as a deadly weapon in a case like this?
Well, it certainly could, but obviously we're not going to be able to legislate taking away people's baseball bats, but we can do something about firearms. And it's a lot easier to kill somebody with a gun than it is with another, a baseball bat or any other kind of an item. We know it's not going to stop all domestic homicides, but it certainly is going to stop some. And it's also going to cut down on the risk of other victims of domestic violence who could be harmed, like other family members or community members, friends. Law enforcement are at greater risk when the perpetrator has access to a firearm.
You both work with members of the Senate and the Assembly on issues of domestic violence. How do you gauge support or non-support for the proposal?
I would say that we've been very fortunate in New York to have bipartisan support for domestic violence laws for many, many years. So unlike a lot of other issues, this is an issue that both sides of the aisle can get behind. I think it's really important for us to not think about this as an issue of gun control or unreasonable gun control. This is a crime control issue. This is something that we can do something about. We can stop somebody from getting killed. That's not often that we have that power to do. And we can do that with reasonable limitations on access to firearms. The other thing I just wanted to mention is a lot of people are saying, well, there's federal statutes limiting firearms and domestic violence offenders, but there are a lot of holes in that law as well. We saw that tragedy in the Texas church massacre in the fall, where the Air Force, the person who was in the Air Force dishonorably discharged, had been convicted of beating his wife and cracking the skull of her child. And that was not reported. And he was allowed to purchase firearms and go in and kill 26 people.
Real quickly, one final part of the topic here is one of the issues is that it would also apply in certain cases before a conviction. And that would allow a judge on a protection order to say, I'm going to take all these guns away at this point. Do you foresee, for example, Gwen, an issue with that because it's before a conviction?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about protection orders is that there are things that judges can do to really assure the protection of the named party. And so I think that this is just one other tool that the judges will have to really protect the person who needs the relief. And so I'm not sure that this is anything that different from what judges currently can do. Judges currently...
Just gives more latitude from what I understand.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. It just gives them more, and I think makes it clearer for them about what they can and cannot do and when they can and cannot do it.
All right. Well, we'll certainly hear more about this when the governor does his State of the State on January 3rd. Listen, both of you, thank you very much for joining us. Gwen Wright, the Executive Director of the State Office for Prevention of Domestic Violence, and Lisa Frisch, the Executive Director for the Legal Project. Thank you both for being with us on Empire State Weekly. Well, millions of dollars heading to each region of the Empire State now. Coming up, the tallies from the year's Regional Economic Awards. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. Now, the national issue of net neutrality has New York's Attorney General ready for a fight. Eric Schneiderman vowing to sue the FCC after it voted to repeal the Obama-era regulations last week. Now, those rules prevented broadband providers from blocking websites or charging for higher quality services. In recent months, Schneiderman's office has been investigating thousands of fake comments submitted during the net neutrality comment process. New York State Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb looking to take on Governor Cuomo now in the race for the governor next year. Kolb is the first Republican to announce his candidacy. The Rochester area lawmaker has been reelected 9 times since 2000 and became Minority Leader here in New York State in 2009. Well, every region of New York State is getting its cut now from the Regional Economic Council competition. This year, $755 million headed to 10 different areas across the state. Central New York getting the biggest amount, being the biggest winner, securing some $86 million for more than 100 projects in that region. The Capital Region close behind with $85 million. Now, Western New York State will put nearly $69 million to use on 112 projects. The Southern Tier getting $67 million, and the North Country receiving nearly $65 million. These awards have been Governor Cuomo's method to jumpstart the state economy for the past 6 years. In 2011, he replaced the old top-down approach with one that is community-based and performance-driven. Also, the success of the state's film tax credit program is bearing fruit now, as 12 New York-based productions earned 29 Golden Globe nominations. The credit offers a 30% tax credit for this year alone. 216 film and television projects have applied for the credit, generating 220,000 new hires in the state and $3.7 billion in New York spending across the state. The Empire State Development Agency says recent improvements to the program have resulted in record-breaking growth, leading to the construction of more studios and infrastructure and cementing New York as a global industry leader. Soldiers abroad may not get their Christmas trees this year. That's according to Senator Schumer, who's calling on the post office to cut the red tape preventing people from sending them overseas. Now, Schumer says dozens of trees will return to senders this week because of last-minute changes that limits the size of packages that can be shipped to the military abroad. Some of those farms, the tree farms doing the shipping, are right here in New York State. Well, it's a little early to start thinking about the 2020 presidential election, or is it? But already rumors are swirling about potential Democratic candidates from here in New York. We're going to pose a hypothetical matchup between New York's governor and junior senator in this week's political poll. The results when Empire State Weekly returns. Two 2018 brings the midterm elections for New York's governor and junior senator. Both Andrew Cuomo and Kirsten Gillibrand have their re-election to focus on in 2018. But there has been no shortage of rumors that both could be viable candidates for the Democratic Party in the 2020 presidential election. So we put that scenario to play in this week's political poll, asking who might have the better shot at winning the nomination for the Democrats. And look at the answers from our poll, showing much more support for Gillibrand, 61 to 39%. How about that? Again, we'll have to see how both candidates do in their re-election campaigns first before we start talking about who will eye a run against President Trump in 2020. And there's also the matter of the state budget before that. So be sure to join us next week when we sit down with the Education Commissioner, Mary Ellen Elia, to discuss what they're hoping to get from the spending plan. For now, though, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Tim Lake in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly in 9 New York regions.